A powerful and arrogant millionaire was staying at a luxury hotel. Suddenly, he had a heart attack and a nearby employee rushed to help. A humble young woman saved that heartless man's life. Little did they know their destinies would change forever before. You hear this amazing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The lobby of the Golden Star Hotel gleamed with the reflection of lights on polished marble floors. It was a scene of opulence, where the aroma of expensive perfumes mingled with the soft scent of fresh flowers in elaborate arrangements. In the midst of this luxurious environment, Anthony Miller, a 55-year-old businessman, walked with firm and decisive steps, his Italian suit impeccably fitted to the athletic body he maintained with Spartan discipline. His piercing blue eyes scanned the environment with the precision of a scanner, absorbing every detail. He checked the gold watch on his wrist. There were exactly 3 minutes left until the meeting that could change the course of his company. The merger with the Thompson Group was the step needed to consolidate his empire in the technology market. He headed for the elevator. Anthony barely noticed the discreet figure moving silently through the lobby. Helen Parker, a 40-year-old woman, pushed her cleaning cart efficiently, her movements almost mechanical after years of practice. Her brown eyes, though tired, still shone with an intelligence that few perceived behind the hotel's simple uniform. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Anthony entered, adjusting his tie as the doors closed. Helen glanced briefly, capturing the image of the powerful man before he disappeared. For a brief moment their gazes met, but Anthony was already absorbed in his thoughts about the imminent meeting. On the 20th floor, Anthony exited the elevator, heading to the presidential suite that had been transformed into an improvised meeting room. As he entered, he was greeted by a group of executives with serious expressions, all dressed in somber shades of gray and navy blue. "Gentlemen, good morning," Anthony greeted, his deep voice filling the room. "Let's get down to business." Meanwhile, on the lower floors, Helen continued her routine. She meticulously cleaned each room, made the beds with military precision, and carefully restocked the amenities. Her movements were automatic, allowing her mind to wander far from there. Helen was not just a housekeeper. In her home country, she had been a respected nurse, saving lives and making a difference. Now in a foreign land, she contented herself with making the rooms impeccable, finding strange satisfaction in creating order from the chaos left by guests. Back in the presidential suite, the tension was palpable. Anthony was in the midst of fierce negotiations, his firm voice echoing through the room. "What I propose, gentlemen, is a merger that will benefit both parties. The Thompson Group has the infrastructure, we have the innovation. Together, we'll be unbeatable." Charles Thompson, the patriarch of the Thompson Group, leaned forward, his narrowed eyes fixed on Anthony. "And what about guarantees, Miller? How can we be sure we're not handing over control of decades of hard work?" Anthony smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was about to respond when he felt a strange pressure in his chest. He ignored it, attributing it to the stress of the moment. "The guarantees are all here, Charles," he said, pushing a thick folder across the table. "Every detail, The sentence hung in the air. The pressure in his chest suddenly intensified, turning into a sharp pain that made him gasp. Anthony clutched his chest, his eyes widening in surprise and fear. "Mr. Miller," the voice of one of the executives sounded distant, as if coming from another world. Anthony tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. The world around him began to spin, colors blending into a confused blur. He felt his legs weaken, and then the impact of the floor against his body. Chaos ensued in the room. Voices shouted for help. Desperate hands tried to offer assistance. In the midst of the confusion, someone had the presence of mind to call the hotel reception. Minutes later, the emergency alarm echoed through the corridors. Helen, who was cleaning a nearby room, felt her heart race at the familiar sound. Years of training as a nurse instantly resurfaced. Without thinking twice, she dropped the duster and ran towards the sound of the alarm. Arriving at the presidential suite, she encountered a scene of panic. Anthony was lying on the floor, his skin pale and lips beginning to turn bluish. "Step back," Helen ordered, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone. She knelt beside Anthony, quickly checking his vital signs. "He's having a heart attack," she diagnosed, immediately beginning chest compressions. "Someone call an ambulance now!" The executives, momentarily paralyzed by the sudden change of scenery, watched in astonishment as the housekeeper performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation with the efficiency of a trained professional. Helen counted, mentally, her arms moving with rhythmic precision. 1, 2, 3, 4. She knew every second was crucial. "Come on, sir," she muttered, alternating between compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. "It's not your time yet." The minutes seemed to drag on. Sweat trickled down Helen's forehead, but she dared not stop. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the sound of ambulance sirens penetrated the tense silence of the room. When the paramedics arrived, they found Helen still performing CPR. They quickly took over, using a defibrillator and administering medications. "Good work," one of the paramedics said to Helen as they prepared Anthony for transport. "So you probably saved his life." Helen watched silently as Anthony was rushed away. The executives, still stunned, began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about what had happened. Charles Thompson approached Helen, who was now standing, straightening her crumpled uniform. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a mixture of admiration and confusion. Helen hesitated for a moment before answering. "Just someone who was in the right place at the right time," she said softly, turning to leave the room. As she walked back to her cleaning cart, Helen felt a strange mix of emotions. Adrenaline was still running through her veins, reminding her of the days when saving lives was her routine. But there was also a twinge of sadness, a reminder of everything she had left behind. Picking up her duster, Helen returned to work, her mind filled with thoughts about the man whose life she had just saved. Who was he really? What would happen now? Meanwhile, the ambulance cut through the city streets, its sirens echoing in the night that was beginning to fall. Inside, Anthony Miller fought for his life, unaware of the changes that fate had prepared for him. The day that had begun, like any other at the Golden Star Hotel, had transformed into the beginning of a journey that no one could have predicted. A journey that would intertwine the lives of a powerful businessman and a humble housekeeper in ways neither could imagine. And so, as night fell over the city, the gears of destiny began to move, setting the stage for a story of redemption, love, and discoveries that was just beginning. The days that followed the incident at the Golden Star Hotel were a whirlwind of emotions and uncertainties. At St. Luke's Hospital, the most renowned in the city, Anthony Miller struggled to recover, surrounded by an elite medical team and state-of-the-art equipment. The private room in which he found himself resembled a presidential suite more than a hospital ward. The walls, painted in soft tones, displayed carefully selected works of art. A large window offered a panoramic view of the city, although Anthony, in his weakened state, could barely appreciate it. On the morning of the third day after the heart attack, Anthony finally opened his eyes, his consciousness slowly emerging from the medication-induced fog. The first thing he noticed was the constant beep of heart monitors, a sonic reminder of his own mortality. "Welcome back, Mr. Miller," said a soft voice beside him. It was Dr. Camila Rodriguez, the cardiologist in charge of his case. "You gave us quite a scare." Anthony tried to speak, but his throat was dry and rough. The doctor offered him a cup of water with a straw, which he gratefully accepted. What happened?" he managed to ask, his voice hoarse and weak. "You suffered an acute myocardial infarction during a meeting at the hotel," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "It was a close call, Mr. Miller. If it wasn't for the quick intervention of a hotel employee, things could have been very different." Anthony's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. "Hotel employee?" "Yes, a housekeeper, from what I was told. She performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, essentially saved your life." Anthony fell silent, trying to process the information. The idea that his life had been saved by a simple housekeeper seemed almost absurd. He, who had always surrounded himself with the best professionals, the most advanced equipment, owed his life to a stranger. "I'd like to thank her," he muttered, more to himself than to the doctor. Dr. Rodriguez smiled gently. "I'm sure you'll have that opportunity, Mr. Miller, but now you need to focus on your recovery. You'll have to make some significant changes to your lifestyle." In the hours and days that followed, Anthony was bombarded with information about diets, exercises, and stress management. His busy routine of meetings and negotiations was replaced by physiotherapy sessions and consultations with nutritionists. Meanwhile, at the Golden Star Hotel, life continued its normal course. Helen Parker resumed her routine of cleaning and tidying as if the day of the incident had never happened. However, something had changed within her. The adrenaline of that moment, the feeling of having made a difference, awakened memories and yearnings that she had long buried. At night, in her small apartment in the suburbs of the city, Helen found herself mentally reviewing medical protocols she hadn't used in years. A week after the incident, Helen was called to the hotel management office. With her heart racing, she gently knocked on the door. "Come in," came the response from the other side. Helen opened the door, finding herself face to face with Mark Oliver, the hotel's general manager. He greeted her with a warm smile, something unusual in their previous interactions. "Helen, please have a seat," he said, indicating the chair in front of his desk. "First, I want to personally thank you for what you did last week. Your quick action not only saved the life of an important guest, but also avoided a potential crisis for the hotel." Helen nodded humbly. "I only did what anyone would do, Mr. Oliver." The manager leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "But not everyone could have done what you did, Helen. I found out that you were a nurse in your country. Why did you never mention this before?" Helen hesitated, feeling a lump in her throat. "I didn't think it was relevant to the job of a housekeeper, sir." Mark shook his head, an understanding smile on his lips. "I see. Well, now that we know, I'd like to propose something to you. The hotel is considering implementing a first aid program for employees. We'd like you to lead this training." Helen's eyes widened in surprise. "Me? But it's been so long since I practiced." "You proved last week that your skills are still quite sharp," Mark gently interrupted. "Besides, we'll offer refresher courses. What do you say?" Helen felt a wave of emotion course through her body. It was an opportunity to reconnect with her vocation, to make a difference again. I would be honored, Mr. Oliver," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Excellent," Mark exclaimed, his smile widening. "Now there's one more thing. Mr. Miller, the man you saved, has contacted us. He would like to meet you personally to thank you." Helen felt her heart skip a beat. The idea of coming face to face with the powerful businessman made her nervous. "When?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's still recovering in the hospital, but as soon as he's discharged, he'd like to arrange a meeting. Would you be willing?" Helen hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. Yes, of course, it would be interesting to meet him. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Anthony Miller was facing his own journey of self-discovery. The long hours of solitude in his hospital room forced him into an introspection he had long avoided. Looking out the window, observing the comings and goings of the city below, Anthony reflected on the choices that had led him here. The relentless pursuit of success, the endless hours of work, the relationships neglected along the way. "All this power, all this money," he muttered to himself. "And in the end, it was a stranger who saved my life." The irony of the situation didn't escape him. He who had always prided himself on being in control, on being the master of his own destiny, had been reduced to a helpless man, saved by the compassion of someone he would normally not even notice. That night, as the city fell asleep outside, Anthony made a silent promise to himself. When he left that hospital, things would be different. He would find the woman who had saved his life and somehow return the favor. What Anthony didn't know as he made this promise was that fate had already set in motion a series of events that would change not only his life, but also Helen's, in ways that neither of them could imagine. As the night progressed, two souls in different parts of the city, one in a luxurious hospital room and the other in a modest apartment in the suburbs, prepared unknowingly for an encounter that would redefine their worlds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and perhaps the beginning of an extraordinary journey for both. A journey of redemption, discovery, and who knows, something deeper that neither of them dared yet to contemplate. And so, as the city slept, the stars shone in the night sky, silent witnesses to destiny unfolding, promising a new dawn full of possibilities. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the hospital room, casting a golden glow on Anthony Miller's face. He opened his eyes slowly, adjusting to the brightness. It had been exactly 2 weeks since the incident at the hotel, and today was the day he would finally be discharged. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Anthony observed the city outside, so familiar and yet so strange. The world had continued turning while he had been confined to this room, but for Anthony, something fundamental had changed. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he said, turning to see who it was. Dr. Rodriguez entered, carrying a clipboard and a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. Ready to return to the world?" Anthony nodded, a half smile on his lips. "More than ready, Doctor, although I must admit that I'm a little apprehensive." The doctor sat in a chair nearby, her kind eyes fixed on her patient. "It's perfectly normal to feel that way, Mr. Miller. You've been through a traumatic and transformative experience. Remember, recovery isn't just physical, but also emotional and mental." Anthony sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "You know, Doctor, I've spent my entire life running, always to the next deal, the next conquest. I never stopped to really live." Dr. Rodriguez smiled understandingly. "Many of my patients come to the same conclusion after an event like yours. The question is, what do you plan to do with this new perspective?" Before Anthony could answer, there was another knock on the door. It was Charles Thompson, his almost partner, accompanied by Robert, Anthony's eldest son. "Dad!" Robert exclaimed, rushing to hug Anthony. The businessman returned the hug, feeling a wave of emotion he hadn't expected. "You're looking great, Miller," Charles commented, shaking Anthony's hand. "Ready to get back to business?" Dr. Rodriguez cleared her throat, casting a warning look. "Mr. Miller still needs plenty of rest and should avoid excessive stress," she cautioned. Anthony nodded, grateful for the doctor's intervention. "Charles, Robert, we need to talk. Things are going to change a bit from now on." Meanwhile, at the Golden Star Hotel, Helen was starting her day with new energy. Since the conversation with the manager, she had taken on the responsibility of organizing first aid training for the employees. That morning, she found herself in the hotel's conference room, preparing materials for the first session. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the handouts and checked the demonstration equipment. "You can do this, Helen," she muttered to herself, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. As employees began to arrive, Helen felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement. It was like going back in time to her days as a nurse when sharing knowledge and saving lives was her daily passion. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "Today we're going to learn skills that can make the difference between life and death." Back at the hospital, Anthony was finishing signing his discharge papers, listening attentively to Dr. Rodriguez's final recommendations. "Remember, Mr. Miller, balanced diet, moderate exercise, and above all, reduce stress," she emphasized. "Your health should be your #1 priority now." Anthony nodded, a clear determination in his eyes. "You can count on it, Doctor. I learned my lesson the hard way." As he prepared to leave the hospital, Anthony turned to Charles and Robert. "About the merger," he began, noticing the immediate tension in both their shoulders. "We're going to move forward, but with some changes. Robert, I want you to take the lead in the negotiations." Robert blinked, surprised. "Me? But Dad, you always said I wasn't ready." Anthony smiled, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's time to trust you more, to prepare the ground for the future." Charles watched the scene with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Anthony looked out the window, his eyes fixed on the city skyline. "I have some things to resolve, Charles. Some debts to pay, not of money but of gratitude. As they left the hospital, Anthony felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The world outside seemed brighter, more alive. The colors were more vibrant, the sounds sharper. It was as if he were seeing everything for the first time. On the way home, Anthony asked the driver to stop in front of the Golden Star Hotel. "Just a moment," he said to Robert and Charles, who looked at him in confusion. Anthony got out of the car, standing on the sidewalk in front of the imposing building. His eyes scanned the facade, pausing for a moment on the windows of the 20th floor where his life had almost come to an end. "Mr. Miller." A hesitant voice pulled him from his thoughts. It was Mark Oliver, the hotel manager, coming out through the revolving door. "Ah, Mr. Oliver," Anthony greeted, extending his hand. "Good to see you." "Are you all right?" Mark asked, concern evident in his voice. "Do we need to call someone?" Anthony laughed softly. No, I'm fine, actually." He hesitated for a moment. "I'd like to know if it would be possible to arrange a meeting with the employee who saved me. Helen, isn't it?" Mark's eyes widened in surprise. Of course, Helen is here today, actually. She's conducting a first aid training for our staff." A broad smile spread across Anthony's face. "Perfect. Would it be possible to—" Before Mark could answer, the hotel door opened again. A group of employees was coming out, chatting animatedly. Among them, Anthony saw a middle-aged woman with brown hair tied in a simple bun. Her eyes shone with an energy that he immediately recognized. "Helen," murmured, his heart inexplicably accelerating. As if she had heard her name, Helen looked in his direction. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. Anthony took a step forward, feeling a sudden urgency to speak to her, to thank her, to— He wasn't even sure what. All he knew was that at that moment, nothing was more important than meeting the woman who had saved his life. Helen, in turn, felt a shiver run down her spine. There he was, the man whose life she had held in her hands. Alive, recovered, looking directly at her with an intensity that left her breathless. Fate, which had intertwined their lives so dramatically 2 weeks ago, now placed them face to face again. What would happen next was a mystery, but one thing was certain. Nothing would be the same for Anthony Miller and Helen Parker. And so, under the afternoon sun, in front of the Golden Star Hotel, two completely different worlds were about to collide again, this time not in a frantic emergency, but in an encounter that promised to change the course of their lives forever. Time seemed to have frozen in that moment in front of the Golden Star Hotel. Anthony and Helen remained motionless, their gazes locked on each other, as if the rest of the world had disappeared. It was Mark who finally broke the silence, clearing his throat softly. "Mr. Miller, this is Helen Parker," he said, gesturing between the two. "Helen, I believe you already know who Mr. Miller is." Helen took a step forward, extending her hand. Hesitantly, "It's a pleasure to officially meet you, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Anthony took her hand, feeling a strange electricity in the touch. "The pleasure is all mine, Mrs. Parker. I don't even know where to begin to thank you." A soft blush colored Helen's cheeks. "There's no need for thanks, Mr. Miller. I just did what anyone would do." Anthony shook his head, a gentle smile on his lips. "No, you did much more than that. You saved my life, and I can never fully repay you." The group of employees who had come out with Helen watched the scene with curiosity, murmuring among themselves. Mark, sensing the need for privacy, quickly dismissed them. "Why don't we continue this conversation in a more private place?" Mark suggested, indicating the hotel entrance. Anthony nodded, but then remembered Robert and Charles waiting in the car. He turned to them, who were watching the scene with intrigued expressions. "You can go ahead," Anthony said. "I have some matters to resolve here." Robert seemed about to protest, but Charles stopped him with a touch on the arm. "Of course, Dad. We'll see you later," Robert finally said, reluctantly getting into the car. As the vehicle drove away, Anthony, Helen, and Mark entered the hotel. The lobby, with its familiar luxury, seemed different to Anthony's eyes now. Every detail, every texture seemed more vivid, as if he was seeing everything for the first time. Mark led them to a private meeting room decorated with discreet elegance. "I'll leave you to it," he said, gently closing the door behind him. A momentary silence hung over the room. Helen sat stiffly in one of the leather chairs, her hands clasped in her lap. Anthony remained standing for a moment, observing her before taking the opposite seat. "Mrs. Parker, Helen," he began, his voice softer than usual. "I spent the last 2 weeks thinking about what I would say to you when we met, and now I realize that no words seem adequate." Helen looked him in the eyes, a shy smile on her lips. "Mr. Miller, there really is no need—" "Please," Anthony gently interrupted her. "Let me speak. You didn't just save my life that day. You gave me a second chance, an opportunity to reevaluate everything." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "You know, I spent most of my life believing that success was measured by the numbers in a bank account, by the size of the empire I built. But in those moments, when I was lying on the floor, breathless, none of that mattered." Helen watched him attentively, noting the vulnerability in his eyes, so different from the image of the powerful businessman she had imagined. "What mattered," Anthony continued, "was that there was someone there, someone who didn't know me, who had no obligation to me, but who was willing to fight for my life. You, Helen." Anthony's words touched something deep inside Helen. She felt tears forming in her eyes but held them back. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "I understand what you're saying, but honestly, I just did what I was trained to do. What any decent human being would do." Anthony leaned forward, his eyes intense. "But that's where you're wrong, Helen. Not everyone would do what you did. Many would have been paralyzed. Others would have simply called for help and waited. You acted. You made the difference." Helen felt a lump in her throat. Anthony's words evoked memories of her previous life, of when being a nurse was more than just a distant dream. "I was a nurse," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "In my country, before everything changed." Anthony looked at her with new understanding. "And now you're here working as a housekeeper." Helen nodded, a sad smile on her lips. "Life doesn't always follow the path we plan, Mr. Miller." "No, it doesn't," Anthony agreed, a determined gleam appearing in his eyes. "But sometimes it gives us a chance to change direction. Helen, I want to help you, not as payment for what you did, but as a recognition of your value, of your skills." Helen looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I'd like to offer you the opportunity to resume your career in healthcare. I can use my contacts, my resources, to help you revalidate your degree, to find a position in a hospital." Anthony's words were interrupted by a muffled sob from Helen. Tears now flowed freely down her face. "I'm sorry," she murmured, wiping her eyes with the back of her hands. "It's just that this seems like a dream I had given up on a long time ago." Anthony stood up, walking to a small table in the corner of the room where there was a water jug. He poured a glass and offered it to Helen. "It's not a dream, Helen," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "It's an opportunity, one that you deserve." Helen drank the water in small sips, trying to calm her emotions. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm, carrying a determination that surprised even herself. "Mr. Miller, I don't know what to say. Your offer is more than I could hope for. But?" "But?" Anthony asked, an eyebrow raised. "But I don't want you to do this because you feel you owe me something. I didn't save your life expecting a reward." Anthony smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "I know that, Helen, and that's exactly why I want to help, because you're the kind of person the world needs more of. Someone who acts out of compassion, not self-interest." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "Besides, don't think of this as a reward. Think of it as a correction from the universe. You should be doing what you love, what you're clearly talented at doing, saving lives." Helen felt a wave of emotion wash over her again. The idea of becoming a nurse again, of making a difference, again was almost overwhelming. I don't know what to say," she murmured. "Say yes," Anthony replied simply. "Say that you'll accept this chance, not for me, but for yourself, and for all the lives you can still touch." At that moment, Looking into Anthony's eyes, seeing the sincerity and hope reflected there, Helen felt something change within her. A spark of hope that had long ago been extinguished began to shine again. "Yes," she finally said, her voice firm despite the tears. "Yes, I accept." Anthony smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. He extended his hand, and Helen took it, sealing not just an agreement, but the beginning of a journey that neither of them could predict. Outside the meeting room, life at the Golden Star Hotel continued its normal course. Guests arrived and departed, employees went about their daily tasks. But inside that room, two worlds had collided, and nothing would be the same again. Fate, in its infinite wisdom, had intertwined the lives of Anthony and Helen in a way that neither of them could have imagined. And as the afternoon sun began to set outside, casting a golden glow over the city, a new story was just beginning to unfold. The weeks that followed the meeting at the Golden Star Hotel were a whirlwind of activities for Helen and Anthony. The businessman, true to his word, mobilized all his contacts and resources to help Helen resume her career in healthcare. Helen, in turn, dove headfirst into the studies necessary to revalidate her nursing degree. Her nights, once filled with exhaustion after long hours of work at the hotel, were now dedicated to books on anatomy, physiology, and updated medical procedures. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Helen found herself sitting on a bench in Central Park, surrounded by piles of notes and books. Her face displayed a mixture of concentration and fatigue, but her eyes shone with renewed determination. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" A familiar voice pulled her from her studies. Helen looked up, surprised to see Anthony Miller standing there holding two takeaway coffee cups. "Mr. Miller, No, it's not taken. Please sit down," she stammered, quickly tidying her papers to make room. Anthony smiled, handing her one of the coffees before sitting down. "I thought you could use a dose of caffeine, and please call me Anthony." Helen accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "Thank you, Anthony. But how did you know I'd be here?" The businessman shrugged, a smile playing on his lips. "Let's say I have my methods. Actually, Mark mentioned that you often study here on weekends." Helen nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was exactly how she liked it, strong with a touch of cinnamon. She wondered how Anthony knew this, but decided not to question it. "How are the studies going?" Anthony asked, his eyes scanning the scattered notes. Helen sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Challenging. There's so much new stuff to learn, so many advances in medicine since I stopped practicing. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing." Anthony frowned, leaning forward. "Helen, look at me," he said softly. When their eyes met, he continued, "You are capable of this, more than capable. Remember how you acted that day at the hotel. That wasn't just training, it was instinct. You were born for this." Anthony's words touched Helen deeply. She felt tears forming in her eyes, but held them back with a trembling smile. "Thank you, Anthony. Sometimes I need to hear that." They sat in silence for a moment, enjoying the coffee and the gentle breeze in the park. Helen noticed how Anthony seemed different from the man she had saved on that fateful day. There was a softness in his eyes, a calmness that wasn't there before. "And you?" she finally asked. "How has your recovery been?" Anthony smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face. "Surprisingly good. You know, that day changed much more than just my physical health. It changed my perspective on everything." He paused, his eyes wandering over the park, observing the families and couples enjoying the sunny day. "I spent so much time chasing after the next deal, the next conquest, that I forgot to live, to appreciate the little moments." Helen watched him attentively, noting the vulnerability in his voice. It was hard to reconcile this version of Anthony with the image of the powerful businessman she had built in her mind. "And now?" she asked softly. "What has changed?" Anthony turned his gaze to her, a gentle smile on his lips. "Everything. I'm delegating more responsibilities at the company, spending more time with my son, and..." He hesitated for a moment. I'm trying to make a difference in other ways, ways that really matter." Helen nodded, understanding. Like helping a former housekeeper resume her nursing career. Anthony laughed, a rich and genuine sound that made Helen's heart skip in an unexpected way. "Exactly. But don't think I'm doing this just for you, Helen. In a way, this is for me too. It makes me feel like I'm doing something meaningful, something that goes beyond simply accumulating wealth." Helen felt a warmth spread through her chest. Anthony's honesty, his vulnerability, touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "Well," she said, a playful smile on her lips, "I guess we're even then. You saved my career. I saved your life. Seems fair." Anthony laughed again, and Helen found herself thinking she could get used to that sound. "Speaking of career," Anthony said, his tone becoming more serious, "I have some news for you. St. Luke's Hospital is interested in offering you a position as soon as you complete the revalidation of your degree." Helen's eyes widened in surprise. "St. Luke's, but it's one of the best hospitals in the city." Anthony nodded, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "Exactly. And they'll be even better with you on their team." Helen felt a wave of emotion wash over her. The idea of working in such a prestigious hospital, of being able to make a difference on a much larger scale than she had ever imagined, was almost overwhelming. I don't know what to say," she finally managed to stammer. Anthony gently placed his hand over hers. "Say that you'll study even harder. Say that you'll embrace this opportunity with everything you've got." Helen nodded vigorously, wiping away tears with her free hand. Yes, I will. I promise I won't disappoint you, Anthony." He squeezed her hand gently before letting go. "I know you won't. And remember, you're not doing this for me. You're doing it for yourself, and for all the patients whose lives you'll touch." At that moment, sitting on that park bench surrounded by the buzz of the city and the distant laughter of children playing, Helen and Anthony felt something change between them. It wasn't just gratitude or the satisfaction of a favor returned. It was something deeper, more complex. It was the beginning of a connection that neither of them had foreseen, but that now seemed as natural as the breeze blowing through the park trees. A connection that promised to take both of them to places they had never imagined, both in their professional and personal lives. And so, as the sun began to set on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, Helen and Anthony remained there, talking, laughing, and sharing hopes and dreams for the future, a future that somehow seemed brighter and full of possibilities than ever before. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only their skills and determination, but also their hearts in ways that neither could predict. The months flew by like pages of a book in the wind. Helen, driven by renewed determination and Anthony's constant support, threw herself headfirst into her studies. Sleepless nights, endless piles of books and notes and practical simulations became her new routine. Meanwhile, Anthony continued his own journey of transformation. The company, now under Robert's more active leadership, was thriving in unexpected ways. The new approach, less aggressive and more focused on sustainable practices and social responsibility, was attracting a new generation of investors and clients. On an autumn afternoon, Helen was in the hallway of St. Luke's Hospital, nervously awaiting the result of her final revalidation exam. Her fingers drummed restlessly against the wall, and she barely noticed the comings and goings of doctors, nurses, and patients around her. "Helen." The familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see Anthony walking towards her, a bouquet of colorful flowers in his hands. "Anthony, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised and touched by the gesture. He smiled, handing her the flowers. "I thought you could use some moral support. Besides," he added with a mischievous glint in his eyes, "I couldn't miss the chance to be the first to congratulate St. Luke's newest nurse." Helen felt her heart race. "But I don't know the result yet." "I know," Anthony replied with a confident smile. "You've worked too hard to fail now." At that moment, the office door opened, and Dr. Oliver, head of the nursing department, came out with a serious expression. "Mrs. Parker," he called, his eyes meeting Helen's. Helen swallowed hard, instinctively clutching Anthony's arm. He covered her hand with his, a silent gesture of support. "Yes, Doctor?" Helen responded, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Oliver maintained the serious expression for another moment before breaking into a wide smile. "Congratulations, Nurse Parker. You passed with distinction." The world seemed to spin around Helen. She heard Anthony let out an exclamation of joy beside her, but it seemed distant, as if she were underwater. Tears of happiness and relief began to stream down her face. I did it?" she murmured, almost in disbelief. "You did it," Anthony confirmed, pulling her into a tight hug. "I knew you would." Dr. Oliver watched the scene with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Parker, your performance was exceptional. We're looking forward to having you on our team. How about we start next Monday?" Helen nodded vigorously, still in Anthony's arms. Yes, of course. Thank you so much, Dr. Oliver." When the doctor walked away, Helen finally pulled away from Anthony, wiping tears with the back of her hands. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It feels like a dream." Anthony smiled, his eyes shining with something that seemed more than just pride. "It's not a dream, Helen. It's real. You made this happen." At that moment, looking into Anthony's eyes, Helen felt something change within her. It wasn't just gratitude she felt, but something deeper, more complex. Something that both scared and excited her at the same time. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said softly. Anthony shook his head. "You would have done it anyway. I just made the path a little easier." They stood there, in the middle of the busy hospital corridor, looking at each other, a palpable energy between them. It was Anthony who finally broke the silence. "I think this deserves a celebration," he said, a playful smile on his lips. "How about dinner? I know a great Italian restaurant downtown." Helen hesitated for a moment. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, eager to prolong this moment of shared happiness. But another part, the cautious part that had learned to protect her heart over the years, made her pause. "Anthony, I don't know if it would be appropriate," she began, but he gently interrupted her. "Helen, it's just a dinner to celebrate. Your achievement, nothing more, nothing less. Unless," he added with a mischievous smile, "you want it to be something more." Helen felt her cheeks flush. All right," she finally agreed. "Dinner would be great." Anthony's smile widened. "Perfect. I'll pick you up at 8. Helen nodded, a shy smile on her lips. As she watched Anthony walk away down the corridor, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and apprehension. This dinner, she instinctively knew, could change everything. Later that night, as she prepared for dinner, Helen found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From housekeeper to nurse again, from a life of struggle to one of possibilities. And at the center of it all was Anthony, the man whose life she had saved and who in turn had transformed hers. Looking at herself in the mirror, Helen barely recognized the woman she saw reflected. It wasn't just the elegant clothes or the careful makeup. It was the sparkle in her eyes, the confidence in her posture. It was the Helen she had always known she could be, finally emerging. When the doorbell rang at 8 o'clock sharp, Helen felt her heart race. She opened the door to find Anthony standing there, elegant in a dark suit, a warm smile on his face. "You look beautiful," he said softly, handing her another bouquet of flowers. Helen smiled, accepting the flowers. "Thank you. You don't look too bad yourself." As they left for the evening, Helen felt a wave of excitement run through her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time she was eager to find out. What she didn't know was that this dinner would be just the beginning of a series of events that would test not only her newly discovered confidence, but also the bonds she had formed with Anthony. Professional challenges, ethical dilemmas, and emotional complications awaited on the horizon, ready to test the strength of this unexpected connection. The Italian restaurant Anthony had chosen was an oasis of elegance and intimacy in the bustling heart of the city. Soft lights danced on white linen tablecloths, and the aroma of fresh herbs and tomato sauce hung in the air. Helen and Anthony were led to a discreet table in the corner, away from the curious glances of other diners. As they settled in, Helen couldn't help but notice how Anthony seemed perfectly at ease in this luxurious environment, so different from the world she was accustomed to. "So," Anthony began, after the sommelier had filled their glasses with an expensive-looking red wine, "how does it feel to be officially a registered nurse again?" Helen smiled, gently swirling the glass in her hands. "Honestly, it still feels surreal. This morning I was a former housekeeper studying to revalidate my degree. Now I'm a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital. It's a bit overwhelming." Anthony leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "But you deserve this, Helen, every bit of it, never doubt that." She nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude. "Thank you, Anthony, for everything. I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully repay what you've done for me." "You already have," he replied softly. "You gave me a second chance at life. That's priceless." The dinner progressed in a mixture of lively conversation and moments of comfortable silence. Helen found it easy to talk with Anthony. Despite their drastically different backgrounds and life experiences, there was a connection between them that went beyond the circumstances that had brought them together. As they savored dessert, a delicious tiramisu, Anthony suddenly became serious. "Helen, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice laden with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Helen's heart quickened. "What is it, Anthony?" He took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you remember the merger we were negotiating on the day when... well, on the day I had the heart attack?" Helen nodded, vividly remembering that fateful day. "Well, the negotiations were concluded last week, and as part of the deal," he paused as if carefully choosing his words, "St. Luke's Hospital is now part of our business group." Helen felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. What does that mean?" Anthony hurried to explain. "It doesn't change anything regarding your job, Helen. Your position was earned on your own merit, but I thought you should know. I didn't want there to be any secrets between us." Helen was silent for a moment, processing the information. On one hand, she appreciated Anthony's honesty. On the other, she couldn't help but feel a little disturbed. "I appreciate your honesty, Anthony," she finally said. "But you have to understand how this might look to others. People might think I got the job because of my connection to you." Anthony reached across the table, gently touching her hand. "Helen, anyone who sees you work for 5 minutes will know that you earned this position on your own merit. Don't let others' opinions diminish your achievement." Helen nodded slowly, but a shadow of concern still lingered in her eyes. I know. It's just that all of this," she gestured, encompassing the elegant restaurant, "sometimes makes me feel like I'm living in a fairy tale. And now knowing this, I'm afraid reality might hit me full force." Anthony gently squeezed her hand. "I understand your fears, Helen, but I promise you there's nothing fairy tale about this. It's real. You are real. What you've achieved is real." They were silent for a moment, the air between them heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Helen spoke. "Anthony, what are we doing? What is this?" She gestured between them. Anthony looked her in the eyes, his expression serious. "Honestly, I don't know, Helen. I know I feel something for you that goes beyond gratitude, something that scares me and excites me at the same time. But I also know that the situation is complicated." Helen felt her heart race at his words. "I feel that too," she admitted softly. "But you're right, it's complicated. You're technically my boss now, and our lives are so different." "Maybe," Anthony agreed, "but maybe those differences are exactly what makes us so, right for each other." Helen couldn't help but smile. "Always the businessman, aren't you? Seeing potential where others would see obstacles." Anthony laughed, the rich, warm sound making Helen feel warm inside. "Guilty as charged. But seriously, Helen, I'm not asking that we make a decision now. I just want you to know that whatever happens between us, your job and your career are secure. This was earned by you and no one can take that away from you." Helen nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you, Anthony, for your honesty and for everything." When they left the restaurant later that night, the air between them was charged with unrealized possibilities. As Anthony drove her home, Helen couldn't help but think about how her life had changed in such a short time. From housekeeper to nurse, from a life of struggle to one of opportunities, and now the possibility of a relationship with a man she never would have imagined being part of her world. Standing at the door of her apartment, Helen and Anthony looked at each other, both hesitant to say goodnight. "Helen," Anthony began, his voice soft, "regardless of what happens between us, I want you to know that I'm incredibly proud of you, of what you've accomplished." Helen felt tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you, Anthony, for believing in me when I had trouble believing in myself." On an impulse, she leaned in and kissed him softly on the cheek. "Good night, Anthony," she whispered, before quickly entering her apartment. Anthony stood for a moment, touching the spot where she had kissed him, a soft smile on his lips. "Good night, Helen," he murmured to the closed door, before turning and walking back to his car. As he drove home, Anthony couldn't help but think about how his life had changed since that fateful day at the hotel. He had gained more than a second chance at life. He had gained a new perspective, a new purpose, and perhaps, just perhaps, the chance at a new love. What neither of them knew was that the challenges they would face in the coming days would test not only their feelings for each other, but also their integrity, their courage, and everything they believed about themselves and the world. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness for Helen. It was her first official day as a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital, and she had barely slept the night before, her mind full of scenarios of what might happen. Dressed. In her new light blue uniform, Helen entered the hospital, feeling as if she were stepping into a completely new world. The familiar smell of antiseptic and the constant hum of activity greeted her, making her feel strangely at home. "Nurse Parker," Dr. Oliver's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Welcome to your first day. Are you ready to begin?" Helen nodded, a confident smile on her face. "More than ready, Doctor." The first hours passed in a blur of orientations, introductions, and familiarization with hospital protocols. Helen absorbed every piece of information eagerly, determined to prove that she deserved to be there. It was around noon that the first real challenge arose. An emergency was announced over the loudspeakers, and Helen found herself running to the trauma room along with the more experienced team. A middle-aged man had been brought in with suspected heart attack, an irony that didn't escape Helen. As the doctors worked frantically, Helen moved efficiently, providing assistance, monitoring vital signs, and anticipating the team's needs. It was only when it was all over, with the patient stabilized and being taken for additional tests, that Helen realized she had been holding her breath. "Excellent work, Nurse Parker," Dr. Oliver commented, patting her on the shoulder. "You kept your cool under pressure. That's crucial here." Helen felt a wave of pride and relief wash over her. She had faced her first test and passed with flying colors. The rest of the day passed without major incidents, but Helen remained alert, absorbing every detail, every procedure. When her shift finally ended, she was exhausted but deeply satisfied. As she walked towards the hospital exit, Helen heard someone call her name. Turning, she saw Anthony walking towards her, a warm smile on his face. "Anthony, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised and a little apprehensive about his presence. "I wanted to see how your first day went," he replied, handing her a small bouquet of flowers. "I hope you don't mind." Helen accepted the flowers, a shy smile on her lips. "Thank you, that's very kind of you. But Anthony, you didn't need to." He raised a hand, gently interrupting her. "I know I didn't need to. I wanted to. Besides," he added with a roguish smile, "I'm here on business too. I have a meeting with the administrative board in half an hour." Helen nodded, feeling a little more relaxed. "Well, in that case, thank you for the flowers. And to answer your question, the day was intense, but good, very good." Anthony smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "I'm glad to hear that. I knew you'd do well." They began walking together towards the parking lot, chatting about Helen's day. She was so absorbed in telling him about the emergency she had helped attend that she barely noticed the curious glances some staff members were casting in their direction. It was only when they reached Anthony's car that Helen realized how intimate the scene might appear to an outside observer. "Anthony," she said, lowering her voice, "maybe we should be more discreet. People might start talking." He frowned, looking around. "You're right. I'm sorry, I didn't think about that. The last thing I want is to cause problems for you." Helen smiled, touched by his concern. "I know, and I appreciate it. It's just that, well, you know how rumors are in a workplace." Anthony nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "I understand. I'll be more careful in the future, but Helen," he added, his voice softening, "I don't want this to stop us from exploring whatever is happening between us." Helen felt her heart race at these words. "I don't either," she admitted softly. "We just need to be cautious, at least for now." "Agreed," Anthony said, a smile returning to his face. "How about dinner at my place next weekend? Completely private, no curious onlookers." Helen hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right. That sounds good." They said goodbye, Helen feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she watched Anthony's car drive away. She knew she was entering uncharted territory, both professionally and personally, and the prospect was both thrilling and frightening. What Helen didn't know was that, while she dealt with her own dilemmas, forces were moving behind the scenes at the hospital that would soon place her at the center of an ethical and professional storm. In the boardroom, Anthony prepared to face a group of skeptical administrators. The merger with St. Luke's Hospital had not been universally well received, and there were those who questioned his motivations and methods. Among the board members was Dr. Richard Matthews, a renowned surgeon and influential figure at the hospital. His eyes followed Anthony with a calculated look as the businessman prepared to present his plans for the hospital's future. "Gentlemen," Anthony began, his voice firm and confident, "we stand on the brink of a new era for St. Luke's Hospital, an era of innovation, excellence, and above all, compassionate care for our patients." As Anthony spoke, Dr. Matthews made frantic notes, his eyes occasionally narrowing with distrust. He had noticed Anthony's arrival earlier, his conversation with the new nurse, and his mind was already at work, weaving theories and plans. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that the battle for the future of St. Luke's Hospital was just beginning, and in the middle of this battle, unknowingly, were Helen and Anthony, their budding relationship about to be tested in ways that neither could predict. Night fell over the city, enveloping the hospital in shadows. Within its walls, lives were saved, hearts were healed, and secrets were kept. And amidst it all, an unlikely love story was beginning to blossom, defying expectations and crossing social boundaries. Little did Helen and Anthony know that the challenges they would face in the coming days would test not only their budding love, but also their integrity, their courage, and everything they believed about themselves and the world around them. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity for Helen. Each shift at the hospital brought new challenges and learning opportunities, and she threw herself into every one of them, determined to prove her worth. Her skills and dedication did not go unnoticed, and soon she found herself earning the respect of colleagues and patients alike. However, as her professional confidence grew, Helen couldn't help but notice the curious glances and occasional whispers that followed her through the hospital corridors. She knew that her rapid rise from housekeeper to nurse, coinciding with the acquisition of the hospital by Anthony's group, had raised some eyebrows. On a particularly busy afternoon, Helen was filling out some charts when she felt a presence beside her. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Dr. Richard Matthews, the renowned surgeon whose reputation preceded him. "Nurse Parker, isn't it?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp and inquisitive. Helen nodded, straightening up. "Yes, doctor, how can I help you?" Dr. Matthews smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "I just wanted to meet our newest acquisition in person. You've been doing remarkable work for someone so recently returned to the profession." Helen felt a chill run down her spine at the veiled tone of his words. "Thank you, doctor. I'm just doing my job as best I can." Of course," he replied, his gaze fixed on her. "It's admirable how some people manage to rise so quickly, Must have good connections. Before Helen could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of an emergency being announced. Grateful for the interruption, Helen quickly excused herself and rushed to answer the call, feeling Dr. Matthews's penetrating gaze on her back. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activities, but Dr. Matthews's words continued to echo in Helen's mind. She knew she needed to be even more careful, more professional, to avoid giving any reason for suspicion or gossip. When her shift finally ended, Helen was physically and emotionally exhausted. She had barely left the hospital when her phone vibrated with a message from Anthony. "Hope you had a good day. Looking forward to dinner tomorrow. Rest well." Helen smiled despite her fatigue. The prospect of seeing Anthony was a balm for her tired spirit. However, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. How to balance her professional and personal life in this delicate situation? The next day dawned sunny, as if the universe itself was trying to lift Helen's spirits. She spent the morning in a mixture of anxiety and anticipation, alternating between choosing what to wear for dinner and reviewing medical protocols to distract herself. At 7 p.m. sharp, Helen arrived at Anthony's mansion, an imposing structure on the outskirts of the city. She took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell, nervously adjusting the simple but elegant dress she had chosen. Anthony opened the door, a warm smile lighting up his face. "Helen," he said softly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You look beautiful." Helen blushed, feeling simultaneously at ease and out of place in this luxurious environment. "Thank you, Anthony. Your house is impressive." He led her inside, through an entrance hall decorated with artwork that probably cost more than she earned in a year. The dining room was equally opulent, with a table set for two, illuminated by candles. "I hope you like Italian food," Anthony commented as he pulled out a chair for her. "I prepared everything myself." Helen raised her eyebrows, surprised. "You cooked?" Anthony laughed, a rich, warm sound that made Helen's heart race. "Don't look so surprised. There are many things about me that you don't know yet." As the evening progressed, Helen found herself relaxing, caught up in easy conversation and smooth wine. Anthony was an attentive host and a great listener, genuinely interested in her experiences at the hospital. It was when they were savoring dessert, another delicious tiramisu, that Anthony touched on a more serious subject. "Helen," he began, his tone subtly changing, "I heard some rumors at the hospital today." Helen felt her stomach sink. "What kind of rumors?" Anthony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Rumors about us, about how you got the job." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. "I feared this might happen," she admitted quietly. "I want you to know," Anthony continued, reaching out to touch her hand on the table, "that I don't give a damn what they say. I know who you are. I know how hard you worked to get where you are." Helen felt tears forming in her eyes, touched by his words. "Thank you, Anthony. That means a lot to me, but what do we do now?" Anthony gently squeezed her hand. "We continue as we are. You continue being the exceptional nurse that you are, and I continue admiring you from afar. And as for us, well, I think it's worth exploring what we have, no matter what others think." Helen nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. "I think so too." At that moment, looking into Anthony's eyes by candlelight, Helen felt a wave of emotion wash over her. There was so much at stake, her newly recovered career, her reputation, her heart. But for the first time in a long time, she was willing to risk it all for something that truly mattered. What Helen didn't know was that while she and Anthony shared this intimate moment, forces were moving against them. At the hospital, Dr. Matthews was busy gathering allies, determined to expose what he saw as favoritism and corruption. The battle for the future of St. Luke's Hospital was about to intensify, and Helen and Anthony would soon find themselves at the center of a storm that would threaten not only their budding relationship, but everything they had worked for. Meanwhile, the night advanced, enveloping the city in a cloak of darkness. In Anthony's mansion, two souls found comfort in each other, unaware of the challenges that the dawn would bring. The weeks following Anthony's dinner party passed in a frenzy of activity at St. Luke's Hospital. Helen threw herself into her work, determined to prove her worth beyond any doubt. Her shifts were long and exhausting, but she found deep satisfaction in every life she touched, in every patient she helped recover. Meanwhile, Anthony faced his own challenges. The implementation of new policies and procedures at the hospital met resistance from some factions of the medical staff, led by Dr. Matthews. Board meetings became increasingly tense, with heated debates about the future direction of the hospital. Despite the turmoil in their professional lives, Helen and Anthony found moments to nurture their growing relationship. Discreet dinners, walks in the park at dawn, late-night phone conversations, each stolen moment was precious to both of them. On a particularly busy afternoon, Helen was rushing between ICU beds when she heard her name being called. Turning, she saw Megan, one of the most experienced nurses at the hospital. "Helen, I need you in trauma room 3 now," Megan said, her tone urgent. "We have a patient coming in, car accident victim. It's serious." Helen nodded, feeling adrenaline course through her veins as she followed Megan. As they entered the trauma room, they were greeted by the chaotic sight of a medical team preparing for the imminent arrival. Minutes later, the doors burst open violently and paramedics entered, pushing a gurney. At the center of the confusion was a middle-aged man, his face pale and contorted with pain. "Male, 45 years old, driver in head-on collision," one of the paramedics quickly informed, blood pressure dropping, suspected internal bleeding. "Doctor." Oliver took command, shouting orders as the team moved in a synchronized dance of medical urgency. Helen found herself in the middle of the whirlwind, her hands moving almost of their own accord, applying pressure here, administering medication there. It was when she was checking the patient's vital signs that she noticed something strange. "Doctor," she called, her voice tense, "there's something wrong with his breathing." Dr. Oliver quickly approached, examining the patient. His eyes widened in recognition. "Damn, it's a tension pneumothorax. We need needle decompression now." Helen was already moving before the doctor had finished speaking. She grabbed the decompression kit and handed it to Dr. Oliver, who quickly performed the procedure. The effect was almost immediate. The patient's breathing visibly improved. "Excellent catch, Nurse Parker," Dr. Oliver praised, a brief smile on his tense face. "You probably saved his life." Helen felt a wave of pride and relief wash over her. She had made a difference. She had used her skills and knowledge to save a life. The following hours passed in a blur of activity as the team stabilized the patient and prepared him for surgery. When she finally finished her shift, Helen was exhausted but deeply satisfied. As she walked towards the hospital exit, Helen almost collided with someone who was hurriedly entering. She looked up to apologize and found herself face to face with Anthony. "Helen!" he exclaimed, surprised and clearly concerned. "Are you all right? I heard about the emergency and came as soon as I could." Helen felt her heart warm at his concern. "I'm fine, Anthony. It was intense, but we managed to save the patient." Anthony smiled, pride evident in his eyes. "I knew you'd be amazing. Want to have dinner? You must be starving." Helen hesitated, looking around nervously. "Anthony, I don't know if we should—" But before she could finish, a cutting voice interrupted them. Well, what an interesting scene." They both turned to see Dr. Matthews standing there, a cold smile on his face. The big boss came personally to check on the well-being of one particular nurse. What admirable dedication. Helen felt her face burn while Anthony straightened up, his posture becoming defensive. "Dr. Matthews," he said, his voice controlled. "I came to check on the situation after hearing about the emergency. Nurse Parker was just updating me." Dr. Matthews arched an eyebrow, his gaze moving between the two. Of course. Well, don't let me interrupt your update." With one last penetrating look, he walked away, leaving Helen and Anthony in tense silence. "I think we should be more careful," Helen finally said, her voice low. Anthony nodded, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're right. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come like this. It's just that I was worried about you." Helen smiled softly, touched by his concern. "I understand, and I appreciate it, but maybe we should go home separately today." Anthony reluctantly agreed. As they said goodbye, both felt the weight of curious glances around them. What had started as a sweet secret was quickly turning into a complicated challenge. That night, lying in her bed, Helen couldn't sleep. Her mind was filled with conflicting thoughts: the thrill of saving a life, the satisfaction of her work, the sweetness of her relationship with Anthony, and the growing anxiety about the complications this relationship could bring. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, Dr. Matthews was in his office, making calls and sending emails. He was determined to expose what he saw as favoritism and corruption, and would not hesitate to use Helen and Anthony as pawns in his power game. The storm that had formed on the horizon was about to break over St. Luke's Hospital, and Helen and Anthony would soon discover that their love would be tested in ways they had never imagined. The morning after dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself sensed the storm that was about to break over St. Luke's Hospital. Helen arrived early for her shift, determined to keep her head high and focus on her work, despite the growing tension she felt in the air. As she made her morning rounds, Helen couldn't help but notice the glances and whispers that followed her through the corridors. The encounter with Anthony the previous evening clearly hadn't gone unnoticed, and rumors seemed to have spread like wildfire. "Nurse Parker," a voice called out, interrupting her thoughts. It was Dr. Oliver, and his expression was grave. "Can you accompany me to my office, please?" With her heart racing, Helen followed the doctor, feeling as if she were walking to her own execution. As they entered the office, she was surprised to see they weren't alone. Dr. Matthews was there, along with two people she recognized as members of the hospital's administrative board. "Please sit down," Dr. Oliver said, indicating a chair. His voice was gentle, but Helen could sense the underlying tension. "Nurse Parker," began one of the board members, a middle-aged woman with heavy-framed glasses, "we've been informed of certain concerns about your position here at the hospital." Helen felt her stomach sink. "What kind of concerns?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Dr. Matthews stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed on Helen. "Concerns about how you obtained your position and about your relationship with certain members of the administration." Helen felt a wave of indignation rise in her throat. "I obtained my position on my own merit," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I went through all the standard hiring and training procedures." "No one is questioning your skills, Nurse Parker," Dr. Oliver intervened, his tone conciliatory. "But you have to understand how your proximity to Mr. Miller can be perceived." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath to calm herself. When she opened them again, her voice was firm and clear. "I understand your concerns. Yes, I have a friendship with Mr. Miller. He helped me when I was going through a difficult time, and I'm grateful for that. But I have never ever used that friendship to obtain professional advantages." The silence that followed was heavy and tense. It was Dr. Matthews who broke it, his voice laden with skepticism. "A friendship, you say? Is that what we're calling it now?" Helen felt the blood boil in her veins. She was about to respond when the office door opened abruptly. Everyone turned to see Anthony Miller standing there, his face a mask of controlled fury. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Helen. "Mr. Miller," the other board member, a gray-haired man, stepped forward. "We were just discussing some administrative issues with Nurse Parker." Anthony entered the room, closing the door behind him. "Administrative issues that apparently require an interrogation with the entire senior management present? Forgive me if I don't believe that." He moved to stand beside Helen, his presence a source of comfort and at the same time, apprehension for her. "If there are concerns about Nurse Parker's professional conduct, they should be addressed through the appropriate channels," Anthony continued, his voice firm. "And if there are questions about my personal relationship with her, I suggest they be directed to me directly." Dr. Matthews took a step forward, his eyes shining with a barely disguised challenge. "Well, since you brought it up, Mr. Miller, why don't we clear everything up at once? What exactly is the nature of your relationship with Nurse Parker?" Helen felt the air leave her lungs. This was the moment she had dreaded so much, the moment when her personal and professional worlds would collide spectacularly. Anthony looked at Helen, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded almost imperceptibly, feeling that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. "Nurse Parker and I are in a relationship, Anthony," finally said, his voice calm but firm. "A relationship that began after her hiring at this hospital, and that in no way influenced her position or professional performance." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen could almost hear the gears turning in everyone's minds in the room, processing this new information. It was Dr. Oliver who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "that certainly complicates things." "It shouldn't," Anthony replied firmly. "Nurse Parker's personal relationship has no bearing on her professional performance, which has been exemplary, as everyone here can attest." Dr. Matthews let out a dry laugh. "You really expect us to believe there was no favoritism involved, that a former housekeeper simply became one of the most respected nurses at this hospital on pure merit?" Helen felt a wave of anger wash over her. Before Anthony could respond, she stood up, facing Dr. Matthews directly. "Yes, doctor, that's exactly what we expect you to believe." "Because it's the truth," she said, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "I may have been a housekeeper, but before that I was a qualified nurse in my country. I worked hard, studied tirelessly, and proved my worth every day since I started working here. If you have doubts about my abilities, I invite you to accompany me on my shifts to observe my work up close." The room fell silent again, everyone looking at Helen with a mixture of surprise and, in some cases, reluctant admiration. "I think we've heard enough for today," the grey-haired board member finally said. "We'll discuss this matter internally and communicate our decision soon." As everyone got up to leave, Helen felt Anthony gently touch her arm. "You were amazing," he whispered. Helen offered a trembling smile in response, but inside she was shaking. The battle may have been won, but she knew the war was far from over. As they left the office, Helen couldn't help but notice the calculating look on Dr. Matthews's face. She knew he wouldn't give up easily, and that the days ahead would be full of challenges. But looking at Anthony by her side, feeling the strength of his support, Helen felt a wave of determination wash over her. No matter what lay ahead, she was ready to fight, for her job, for her relationship, and for everything she had achieved. What Helen didn't know was that this meeting was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, much larger forces were in motion, and the future of St. Luke's Hospital, and all those who worked there, was about to be shaken to its very foundations. The days following the tense meeting in Dr. Oliver's office were a whirlwind of emotions and challenges for Helen and Anthony. The hospital buzzed with rumors and speculation, and Helen felt the curious and, at times, critical gazes of her colleagues following her wherever she went. Determined to prove her worth beyond any doubt, Helen dove even deeper into her work. Her shifts became longer, her actions more meticulous, her dedication to patients even more intense. She was determined to show everyone that her position at the hospital was the result of her own merit and nothing else. On a particularly busy afternoon, Helen was doing her rounds in the pediatric ward when she heard a sharp cry coming from one of the rooms. Without hesitation, she ran towards the sound, her heart racing. Entering the room, she encountered a chaotic scene. A girl of about 8 years old was having a violent seizure while her mother screamed for help, panicking. Helen acted instinctively. With quick and precise movements, she put the girl on her side to prevent her from choking, calling for additional help while checking the child's vital signs. "What's her name?" Helen asked the mother, trying to keep her voice calm. "Sophie," the woman replied between sobs. "Please, help my daughter." "Sophie will be fine," Helen assured, though her own heart was racing. "We're taking care of her." At that moment, Dr. Matthews came running into the room, followed by a team of nurses. Helen quickly updated him on the situation, her voice professional and controlled, despite the adrenaline rushing through her veins. To her surprise, Dr. Matthews didn't push her aside as she expected. Instead, he began working alongside her, giving quick and precise orders as they fought to stabilize the girl. The following minutes seemed to stretch for hours. Helen moved in sync with the team, anticipating the doctor's needs, keeping calm even when the situation seemed most desperate. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Sophie's seizures began to subside. Her vital signs stabilized, and a collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. "Good work, team," Dr. Matthews said, his voice tired but satisfied. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to Helen. "Excellent reaction, Nurse Parker. Your speed and competence probably saved this girl's life." Helen felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It wasn't just the praise that touched her, but the validation of her skills coming from someone she knew to be one of her biggest critics. "Thank you, Doctor," she responded softly. "I was just doing my job." Dr. Matthews observed her for a moment, an indecipherable expression on his face, before nodding briefly and turning to comfort Sophie's mother. As Helen left the room, exhausted but deeply satisfied, she almost collided with Anthony, who was standing in the hallway, a look of concern on his face. "I heard about the emergency," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" Helen nodded, suddenly aware of the curious glances around them. "I'm fine, the patient is stable now." Anthony seemed to want to say more, but held back, clearly aware of their surroundings. "Good work," he finally said, his voice professional but his eyes full of pride and affection. As Anthony walked away, Helen couldn't help but notice Dr. Matthews observing their interaction with interest. She expected to see disapproval on his face, but instead there was something that almost seemed like understanding. In the days that followed, Helen noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere of the hospital. The critical looks began to give way to expressions of respect. Her colleagues, who before seemed hesitant to work with her, now actively sought her opinion and assistance. Even Dr. Matthews seemed to have softened his stance. Although he still maintained a professional distance, Helen caught him several times observing her work with what appeared to be reluctant approval. One night, after a particularly long shift, Helen found Anthony waiting for her in the hospital parking lot. She hesitated for a moment, aware of the risks of being seen together, but the expression on his face made her approach. "What's wrong?" she asked, concern tinging her voice. Anthony smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "Good news," he said. "The board has concluded its investigation." Helen felt her heart race. "And?" "And they decided there's no evidence of favoritism or misconduct," Anthony replied, relief evident in his voice. "Your work speaks for itself, Helen. They recognized your merit and your dedication." Helen felt tears of relief form in her eyes. All the sleepless nights, all the anxiety and stress of the past few days, it had all been worth it. "There's more," Anthony continued, his smile widening. "They're considering you for a promotion. Nursing supervisor of the pediatric ward." Helen was speechless, overwhelmed with emotion. She had dreamed of an opportunity like this, but never imagined it would come so soon, especially considering the circumstances. I don't know what to say," she finally managed to stammer. Anthony gently took her hands in his. "Say you'll accept. Say you'll continue to be the amazing nurse you are, touching lives and making a difference every day." Helen nodded, tears now flowing freely down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." At that moment, standing in the dark hospital parking lot, Helen and Anthony felt as if they had weathered a great storm. They had faced challenges, rumors, and prejudices, and had emerged stronger. What they didn't know was that, although this battle had been won, the war was far from over. Behind the scenes, new forces were aligning, ready to challenge not only their relationship, but the very future of St. Luke's Hospital. As night fell over the city, enveloping the hospital in shadows, Helen and Anthony shared a soft kiss, full of promises for the future. A future that, although uncertain, they were determined to face together. The months that followed Helen's promotion were a whirlwind of changes and new challenges. As nursing supervisor of the pediatric ward, she found herself navigating not just medical complexities, but also intricate interpersonal dynamics and administrative responsibilities. Helen embraced her new role with determination and passion. Her mornings began early, with team meetings where she inspired and guided her staff of nurses. Afternoons were filled with rounds, consultations with doctors, and often emotional or uplifting moments with the young patients and their families. On a particularly busy afternoon, Helen was reviewing some charts when she heard a commotion coming from the corridor. She rushed out of her office to find a young father in panic, holding a baby who was crying uncontrollably. "Please, someone help!" the man shouted, his face pale with fear. "My daughter, she won't stop crying and she's turning blue." Helen ran to them, her years of experience guiding her actions. With quick and precise movements, she took the baby from the trembling father's arms. "What's her name?" Helen asked, keeping calm in her voice as she quickly examined the child. "Maria," the father responded, his voice breaking. "She's only 3 months old." Helen nodded, her experienced eyes immediately noticing the signs of respiratory distress. "Maria, sweetie, we're going to take care of you," she murmured softly to the baby while calling for an emergency team. The next few minutes were a race against time. Helen worked in sync with the medical team that arrived quickly, her skilled hands assisting in the necessary procedures to open little Maria's airways. It was during this controlled chaos that Helen noticed Dr. Matthews observing closely, his expression a mixture of interest and something that almost seemed like approval. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Maria's cry turned into small hiccups, and her color began to return to normal. A collective sigh of relief echoed through the room. "She's going to be okay," Helen assured the father, who was now openly crying. "We'll keep her under observation, but the worst has passed." As the team dispersed and Maria was taken for additional tests, Helen found herself face to face with Dr. Matthews. "Impressive work, Nurse Parker," he said, his voice carrying a tone of reluctant respect. "Your promotion was well-deserved." Helen was momentarily speechless, surprised by the unexpected compliment. "Thank you, Doctor," she finally managed to respond. "I was just doing my job." Dr. Matthews observed her for a moment, as if he was re-evaluating something. "Yes, well, keep it up." With a brief nod, he walked away, leaving Helen thoughtful. Later that night, as Helen was finalizing some reports in her office, a soft knock on the door surprised her. She looked up to see Anthony standing in the doorway, a warm smile on his face. "I heard about your busy day," he said, entering and closing the door behind him. "I came to see how you're doing." Helen smiled, feeling the fatigue of the day finally settle over her. "I'm okay, tired, but satisfied." Anthony approached, sitting on the edge of Helen's desk. "You're amazing, you know that? What you do, here every day, it's truly inspiring." Helen felt a warmth spread through her chest. The honesty in Anthony's voice, the pride in his eyes, touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Anthony," she said softly. "It means a lot coming from you." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken emotions. Finally, Anthony spoke. "Helen, I've been thinking about us, about the future. I know things have been complicated, with the hospital politics and all, but I can't help feeling that what we have is something special, something worth fighting for." Helen felt her heart race. "I feel the same way, Anthony, but are you sure? The risks, the complications." Anthony took her hand gently. "I'm sure, more sure than I've ever been about anything. I love you, Helen, and I'm ready to face whatever challenges come our way, as long as we're together." Tears welled up in Helen's eyes. "I love you too, Anthony. I have for a while now, I was just afraid to admit it." As they leaned in for a kiss, both Helen and Anthony felt as if they were stepping into a new chapter of their lives. A chapter filled with promise, love, and yes, challenges, but ones they were ready to face together. What they didn't know was that this moment of happiness was just the calm before a storm that was brewing on the horizon. Forces beyond their control were aligning, ready to test not just their love, but their very principles and everything they had worked for. As the night deepened outside St. Luke's Hospital, Helen and Anthony held each other close, savoring their shared love and the promise of a future together. Little did they know that soon they would be called upon to fight not just for their relationship, but for the very soul of the hospital they both held dear. The following weeks brought a whirlwind of changes to St. Luke's Hospital. As news of Helen and Anthony's relationship spread, reactions were mixed. Some staff members were supportive, seeing their story as a modern-day fairy tale. Others, however, viewed it with skepticism and suspicion, wondering if Helen's rapid rise through the ranks was truly based on merit. Dr. Matthews, surprisingly, seemed to have softened his stance. While he maintained a professional distance, Helen often caught him observing her work with what appeared to be grudging respect. His change in attitude did not go unnoticed by the rest of the staff, further cementing Helen's position as a respected member of the team. One crisp autumn morning, Helen arrived at the hospital to find an unusual buzz of activity. Nurses and doctors were huddled in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. As she approached the nurses' station, Megan, one of the senior nurses, pulled her aside. "Helen, have you heard?" Megan asked, her voice low and urgent. "Heard what?" Helen replied, a sense of unease growing in her stomach. Megan glanced around before continuing. "There's talk of a major restructuring. Rumor has it that the board is considering selling part of the hospital to a large healthcare conglomerate." Helen felt her heart skip a beat. "What? But that could change everything, our patients, our staff." "I know," Megan nodded grimly. "And that's not all. Some are saying that Anthony is behind this move." Before Helen could respond, her pager beeped urgently. A crisis in the pediatric ward demanded her immediate attention. As she rushed to handle the emergency, her mind raced with the implications of what she had just heard. Throughout the day, Helen found herself torn between her professional duties and her personal concerns. The pediatric ward was bustling with activity, and she threw herself into her work, finding solace in the routine of care and compassion. It wasn't until late in the evening that Helen finally had a moment to breathe. As she was finishing up some paperwork in her office, there was a soft knock at the door. She looked up to see Anthony standing there, his face etched with worry. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice unusually somber. Helen nodded, gesturing for him to come in. As Anthony closed the door behind him, she could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. "I suppose you've heard the rumors," Anthony began, taking a seat across from her. Helen met his gaze steadily. "Is it true? Are you planning to sell part of the hospital?" Anthony sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated, Helen. The hospital's finances aren't as stable as we'd like. This could be a way to secure our future, to bring in new resources and technology." "But at what cost?" Helen pressed, feeling a mix of emotions, concern, disappointment, and a touch of anger. "What about our staff, our patients, the community we serve?" "I'm trying to protect all of that," Anthony insisted. "This isn't just a business decision, Helen. I care about this hospital, about the people here. But sometimes to save something, you have to be willing to change it." Helen stood up, pacing the small office. "And you didn't think to discuss this with me?" "I thought we were partners, Anthony, in life and in this hospital." Anthony's face fell. "You're right. I should have talked to you sooner. I wanted to have all the facts before I brought it to you. I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." As they continued to talk, their voices rising and falling with the intensity of their emotions, neither noticed the shadow that passed by Helen's office door. Dr. Matthews paused for a moment, listening intently, before moving on with a thoughtful expression on his face. The conversation between Helen and Anthony lasted long into the night. By the time they left the hospital, both were emotionally drained, but had reached a tentative understanding. Anthony promised to involve Helen more in the decision-making process, and Helen agreed to keep an open mind about the potential changes. As they walked to their cars, hand in hand, despite the late hour and the risk of being seen, neither could shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something monumental. The future of St. Luke's hung in the balance, and their relationship would be tested in ways they had yet to imagine. Little did they know that the coming days would bring challenges that would shake the very foundations of their love, their careers, and the hospital they had both come to call home. The storm that had been brewing on the horizon was about to break, and Helen and Anthony would find themselves at its very center. As they drove home separately, the city lights blurring, in the night, both Helen and Anthony were lost in thought. They had weathered storms before, but something told them that the biggest test of all was yet to come, and as the first drops of rain began to fall, it seemed as if even the heavens were preparing for the turbulent days ahead. The following. Weeks at St. Luke's Hospital were filled with tension and uncertainty. The news of the potential sale had spread like wildfire, and the corridors buzzed with whispered conversations and worried glances. Helen found herself in an increasingly difficult position, torn between her loyalty to Anthony and her commitment to the hospital staff and patients. One morning, as Helen was making her rounds in the pediatric ward, she was approached by Dr. Matthews. His face was uncharacteristically grave. "Nurse Parker, do you have a moment?" he asked, gesturing towards an empty consultation room. Helen nodded, following him with a sense of trepidation. Once inside, Dr. Matthews closed the door and turned to face her. "I assume you're aware of the rumors about the hospital sale," he began without preamble. "I am," Helen replied cautiously, "but I don't know much more than anyone else at this point." Dr. Matthews studied her face for a moment before continuing. "I've been doing some digging, Helen. The company that's interested in buying part of the hospital, they don't have the best reputation. They're known for aggressive cost-cutting measures, often at the expense of patient care." Helen felt her heart sink. "Are you sure about this?" "I've seen the reports, talked to colleagues at other hospitals they've acquired," Dr. Matthews confirmed. "I know. You and Miller are close. I'm telling you this because I believe you truly care about this hospital and its patients. We need to stop this sale, Helen." As Helen left the consultation room, her mind was reeling. She knew she needed to talk to Anthony to get his side of the story, but a part of her feared what she might learn. That evening, Helen found herself pacing in Anthony's spacious living room. She had asked to meet him away from the hospital, away from prying eyes and ears. "Anthony, we need to talk about this sale," she began, her voice tight with tension. "I've heard some troubling things about the company that's interested in buying." Anthony sighed, pouring himself a glass of scotch. "Helen, you have to understand, the hospital's financial situation is precarious. We need this investment to stay afloat." "But at what cost?" Helen pressed. "I've heard they have a history of cutting corners, of prioritizing profits over patient care. Is that really what you want for St. Luke's?" Anthony's face hardened. "Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. This investment could save the hospital, Helen. Without it, we might have to close entire departments, lay off staff." "There has to be another way," Helen insisted. "What about seeking donations or partnering with a non-profit?" "Don't you think I've explored those options?" Anthony snapped, his frustration evident. "This is our best chance, Helen. I need you to trust me on this." As their argument escalated, Helen felt a growing distance between them. It wasn't just about the hospital anymore. It was about their values, their vision for the future. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at St. Luke's grew increasingly tense. Staff members were taking sides, and Helen found herself at the center of it. Many looked to her for guidance, seeing her as a bridge between the administration and the frontline workers. One afternoon, as Helen was leaving a particularly difficult meeting with the nursing staff, she was surprised to find Dr. Matthews waiting for her. "I have a proposition for you, Helen," he said, his voice low. "A group of us are planning to fight this sale. We're gathering evidence, preparing to present our case to the board. We need your help." Helen hesitated, torn between her loyalty to Anthony and her growing concerns about the sale. I need to think about it," she finally replied. That night, as Helen tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, she received a text from Anthony. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Big announcement. Need you there." The next morning, Helen arrived at the hospital early, her stomach in knots. As she entered the boardroom, she was struck by the tense atmosphere. Anthony sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. As the meeting began, Anthony stood up. "I know there have been a lot of rumors and concerns about the potential sale of the hospital," he began. "I want to assure you all that I've heard your concerns and I've taken them seriously." Helen held her breath, her heart racing. "After careful consideration and further negotiations," Anthony continued, "I've decided not to proceed with the sale." A collective gasp went through the room. Helen felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Instead," Anthony went on, "we'll be implementing a series of cost-saving measures and launching a major fundraising campaign. It won't be easy, but I believe that together we can secure the future of St. Luke's without compromising our values or the quality of care we provide." As the meeting adjourned, Helen approached Anthony. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a wordless understanding passed. Between them, "Thank you," Helen said softly, "for listening, for making the right choice." Anthony smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Helen. You reminded me of what's truly important." As they left the boardroom together, Helen felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be challenging, but she knew that with Anthony by her side and with the dedication of the St. Luke's staff, they could face anything. The sun was setting as Helen and Anthony walked out of the hospital that evening, casting a warm glow over the city. They had weathered a storm together, and though they knew there would be more challenges ahead, they faced the future with hope and determination. As they drove home, Helen reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a housekeeper to a respected nurse leader, from a woman struggling to find her place to someone who had found not just a career, but a calling and a partner. She knew that whatever the future held, she was exactly where she was meant to be. And as the lights of the city twinkled around them, Helen and Anthony drove towards their shared future, ready to face whatever came their way, together.